Welcome back to day 31 of online learning. We're going over unit 7, lesson 3.1 for math. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up your objectives for today, what we're trying to be working on throughout this video and through your have to. Your objectives that you should be able to do by the end is that I will be able to solve word problems that talk about distance being traveled, and I will be able to solve addition and subtraction story problems. So those are the two objectives that we're focusing on to figure out if you're mastering your success criteria, if you can say that you're able to do those two things. What we're doing today is we're figuring out the distances between places on our historic Oregon Trail. So we're figuring out the distances between different spots on this trail. So we're going to be using a map to be comparing these. So what we're going to be doing right now is I'm going to pull up the map and we're going to be going over problem 1. That way I'm showing you exactly how I want you to be solving these problems. Your have to today is pages 430 to 431, and it's about the Oregon Trail. So the directions are to solve these problems about a journey by covered wagon. Use this map to help you. Show your solutions for each problem on a separate piece of paper. So to give you some background information about the Oregon Trail, the Oregon Trail was about a 2,000-mile long journey to all the way to the west, and people used this at the time, the people were called pioneers, to move west. And during this time, they used covered wagons that looked like this to be taking this really, really long journey. So they used these wagons to head west on the Oregon Trail. So these problems are all about a pioneer family, the Smiths, who traveled out west in their covered wagon. And so the map on this page, this map, shows their route along the Oregon Trail, and it shows some of the places where the Smith family stopped along the trail. So the numbers on the map tell you how many miles they had traveled from the beginning of their trip each time they stopped. So they started at Council Bluffs, and then they went to Fort Kearny, and then they stopped. They traveled 319 miles until their first stop. And then their next stop was Ash Hollow, where they stopped at 504 miles. So they went from Council Bluffs to Ash Hollow and traveled 504 miles. Pause me and think about what their next stop was and how many total miles that they've traveled so far at this next stop. Their next stop was Scotts Bluff, and at this point they traveled 596 miles from Council's Bluffs. So they started all the way over here and traveled this whole trail until they stopped in Oregon City. So from Council's Bluffs to Oregon City, the Smiths traveled a total of 1,930 miles. So keep in mind, I want you to remember that each distance is showing the distance from the beginning. So now we're trying to figure out and compare the distance between two different points. So I'm going to read number 1, and we're going to be going over it together to show how I want you to be showing your work for me. And that way it's really clear what I expect for you during your have to. So number 1 says, it's 1874, and the Smith family sets out from Council Bluffs, Iowa. In the first 2 weeks, they traveled 319 miles to Fort Kearny. So they travel all the way here. At the end of the first month, they crossed the Platte River at Ash Hollow. They had traveled 504 miles since their trip began. How far did they travel from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So it's asking us, how far did they travel from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So it's asking, what is the distance between here? So first I'm going to take notes of this problem. So it's 1847, and the Smith family sets out from Council Bluffs, Iowa. In the first 2 weeks, they travel 319 miles to Fort Kearny. So 319 miles from, I'm going to write CB for Council Bluffs to Fort Kearny, and I'm going to write FK. So 319 miles from CB to FK. At the end of the first month, they crossed the Platte River at Ash Hollow. They have traveled 504 miles since their trip began. So 504 miles to Ash Hollow, and I'm going to write AH. And that's from all the way from the beginning from Council's Bluff. So 504 miles to Ash Hollow from Council's Bluff. And my question is, how far did they travel from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So how far from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So I need to figure out how far from here to here. So think about an equation that I can use to represent this problem. Pause me and think about an equation now. So my equation can be 504 minus 319 equals blank. And that will show me how far the distance between Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow was. Or I could also just say 319 plus blank equals 504 because that shows the distance that they needed to travel from here to here. Either equation works because it's a fact family. So the same amount that I'm adding to 319 will get me to 504, just like the same amount that I'm taking away will get me to that same answer. So without finding the exact answer, pause me and think about how many miles do you think it was from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? Do you think the family traveled more or less than 100 miles? Pause me and think about how many miles do you think it was from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So I'm thinking that it's probably going to be more than 100 miles because I know that 319 plus 100 wouldn't equal 504. It'd be less still than 504. So I know that it's going to be more than 100 miles. It could be your choice, but pause me and solve one of these equations now. I decided to be solving 504 minus 319. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to solve by adding one number in parts. So what I'm first going to do is I know that 319 is also equal to 300 plus 10 plus 9. I'm only going to break down 319 by its place value. I'm going to keep 504 the same. And how I'm going to do that is I see 504 minus 300 is equal to 204. All I'm changing is my hundreds place, so 500 minus 300 would be 200, and then I can't forget my ones place, which is 204. And now I also need to take away my tens place, so 204 minus 10 equals what? Pause me and think about how I can solve this. So I notice that I can't take anything away from my tens place here since it's a 0. So I need to go into my hundreds place. But 204 minus 10 would be 194 because I would be regrouping my hundreds place and making it into tens. And then I'd only be taking one 10 away to get 194. Notice how I can't change my tens place and make it 10 minus 0. I can't do that because then I'd be switching the number 204 to 214. So I can't change the order of what I'm taking away right now. I need to make sure that it's still the same number. So now I have 194 minus 9. Pause me and think about what 194 minus 9 is. And 194 minus 9 would be 185. So the question is, how far did they travel from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow? So I would say that they traveled 185 miles from Fort Kearny to Ash Hollow. So notice what I just did here is I took my notes, I showed my work, and I wrote my answer, and I made sure I included my label of 185 miles. And that's exactly what I expect for you guys to be doing by yourself, is that you still need to be showing your work and breaking down the entire problem and showing me step by step what you did so then I can understand how I can help you next. I'm going to leave my work up for number 1 on your Kami assignment, just because that way I'm showing you exactly what I want and expect out of you for your assignment. So let's take a look at your have to for today. Your have to for today is you're going to complete pages 430 to 431, which is the worksheet we just went over, the Oregon Trail, and show your work for every problem. And then for number 2, you're going to then do 15 minutes of IXL only on your highlighted skills, and you're going to try to get a SMART score of 80% on the skills that you're working on. And here's a rubric underneath to show how you're scored. So to get a 3, you need to do all the problems on pages 430 to 431, show your work, and do 15 minutes on IXL on your highlighted skills.